Reading. Kia ora.
David Clendon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tēnā koe ke te mihi nui kia koutou. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to speak to these two bills, to the Maraeroa A and B Block Settlement and Incorporation Bill, and to acknowledge both the importance of this individual settlement and the arrangements that are made within it, and also to comment on the process that we're in today, the progressing in the most prompt manner possible. These the settlement bills, which are critically important, and in many cases the claimants have waited for a very long time. So we're very pleased both to speak in support of the bills we're discussing today, and indeed of the process that's allowing them to be got through the legislative process as quickly as is appropriate. Mr. Speaker, I'd particularly acknowledge the people who are most affected by these particular bills, the Settlement and Incorporation Bill, Ngā Te Rereahu, Ngā Te Maniapoto, Ngā Te Tuwharetoa, Raukawa, and Ngā Iwi katoa, Ngā Hapu katoa, who are affected by these settlements today. The Incorporation Bill is particularly interesting, as has been noted, to the effect that it creates a body, an umbrella body, if you will, that enables a degree, at least, of decision-making, of authority to be returned to people who ought to have that authority to make decisions about the ongoing use and of this and the future of the land. It's an interim step, as the Minister, Mrs. Turia, in introducing this reading acknowledged, but it's a very positive and a useful step towards a final resolution of what is quite complex claims. The incorporation part clearly does reflect the fact that historically there was shared use of the resource that was of the land in question. Māori, of course, had very different notions of ownership than in Western thought, but very clear-cut and a sophisticated, well-understood system of user rights, shared user rights, access to resource at different times of year, through different seasons, for different purposes. And the establishment of this incorporation would seem to capture the essence of that cross-hapu, cross-iwi understanding, that a resource can be shared, can be administered collectively for the collective good. And that's an entirely appropriate and a very positive outcome of this. The question of ownership, of course, has been very much in the news of late. There is an ongoing process, of course, not very far from here at Waifetu Marae, that's seeking to resolve some of the outstanding issues that will continue to in a sense, bedevil the resolution of settlement processes, but also the fact that these conversations are occurring is a positive sign. It's a positive thing. And in terms of trying to unpick these notions of ownership, governance, kāwanatanga, rangatiratanga, it's worth getting back occasionally, I think, to first principles and to acknowledge that at one level, the question was raised last week at Waifetu. Is the English text of the treaty and the Māori text of Te Treaty, are the two irreconcilable? And the comment in response to that question was made that, in fact, trying to reconcile those two versions of a treaty is a bit like trying to reconcile boiling water and ice, which wasn't a very hopeful position, perhaps. But nevertheless, a great deal of the last 150 or more years have been processes, conversations, arguments, on occasion much more than simply argument, that does seek to reconcile what at the front of it may appear to be irreconcilable, to bring together or at least to find a middle road between the rightful claim of iwi and hapu to exercise their chieftainship, their rangatiratanga, while allowing the Crown to govern. It's fair to say that some of the dispute, some of the ongoing concerns about what constitutes ownership, what constitute user rights, what are the nature of the rights that Māori rightfully claim, get back to a more fundamental issue, an issue of worldview, in fact, the very different cosmology of Western and Māori thought. Clearly in the Western tradition that came to New Zealand in the early 1800s, late 18th century in fact, based on the Christian theory, the Christian belief structure, which puts humanity, mankind, as the crown of creation, gives people dominion over all things, establishes a very hierarchical relationship with people at the top and all other beings subservient in a sense. Very much at odds with Māori cosmology, a Māori belief system, which is much more horizontal, that sees people, humanity, as in a familial relationship with other species, with other parts, with maunga, with awa, with the ngāhere, and everything that lives in them. Very, very different cosmology and a fundamentally different belief system. And clearly, a lot of the practical, pragmatic resolutions we're trying to seek must understand and acknowledge that they're coming from a profoundly different belief system and base. And that is clearly at the heart of some of the difficulty in this. So these resettlement bills, these deals that are being done, are endeavouring to reconcile both the language of a covenant that was signed in 1840 and equally endeavouring to reconcile two very different and often conflicting belief systems. I would argue, in fact, it's my firm belief that the Māori belief system is one that is based much more in humility than in pride, and I think that that humility comes through in the willingness of iwi and hapu to accept less than they could reasonably expect, to acknowledge that we have moved on and that a full and total restitution of what was lost would effectively cripple the economy, that would lead to complete social breakdown, and the humility and the willingness of iwi and hapu to accommodate the reality of the 21st century, I think, must be acknowledged and indeed praised for that willingness to accommodate, which has been reflected today by the particular hapu and iwi who are most affected by this bill. Clearly, all of these settlements are aimed at restoring the rightful authority to make decisions about the use of the resources in question, the right to benefit and to distribute benefit from the use of those resources, and critically to fulfil the absolute obligation that Māori as kaitiaki feel to protect and preserve the resource, not only for present day, but critically for the future generation. We inherit these resources from our tūpuna. We have an absolute obligation to pass them on in at least as good a condition as we find them, and preferably in a better state. And all of these bills, and specifically the Maraeroa agreements that we're seeking to progress today, are fundamentally about that. Preservation of the mana of the people who have absolute authority, or ought to have that authority, to make decisions and to fulfil that obligation as kaitiaki to pass on a better future to the generations coming after us. So that is sufficient for now. Again, our regard to the folk affected by the settlement, our acknowledgement of the work that's been done both so far by all sides in this agreement, and our hope and belief that this will advance to an appropriate settlement promptly. Kia ora.
Katrina Shanks.